Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, pretty much anywhere you're going to get your content at Hawk Blogger. And it's a special Thursday for lots of reasons. One, it's a gorgeous day here in the PNW. You know, we hunt those special sunny days here. We don't get as many of them as we'd like, so we got to enjoy them while you got them. But even more than that, we have had a tumultuous, turbulent, exciting, depending on your perspective, offseason here in Seattle with the Seattle Seahawks. And one of the things that's changed the most is the wide receiver room. And as we head into this NFL draft, there's only one person that if I could pick to have a conversation with about the wide receiver room that I wanted to have it with. His name is Matt Harmon. And we bring him aboard right now. He is from Reception Perception. He is Reception Perception. Joins us from, I believe, Virginia. Is that right, man?
That is correct. And I just want to say two things off the top. Number one, obviously, of course, thank you for having me. Secondly, I do not promise to deliver better than good weather. Okay. You said that, more importantly, more exciting was me being here. I'm not promising that I'm going to bring people more joy than some good natural sunlight, but I will do my best.
You know what? It's an amplification process. We will take the combinatorial power of you and your wide receiver expertise with the good sunny weather here. Matt, before we get into obviously the Seahawks and the receivers, I'd love to know a little bit about how you got into this. And the first thing I'm going to ask you before I get the kind of the story is, when you go to a party and someone says, "What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
Oh man, it's great. That's a great question because, it kind of depends how I'm feeling, right? Because obviously, somebody here is like, I work in football, like explaining the details of what I do in terms of the actual mechanics of like reception perception. That's probably a little bit too in the weeds, but simply like a great example. I had somebody actually come out yesterday to give me a quote for some landscaping work in the backyard. And he asked, and I had to push it back because I was on a podcast.
Yeah.
I had to push it, point it back. And I was like, He's like, so what do you do? I'm like, I'm in media. Oh, like what kind? Well, I cover the NFL, I kind of say something like that because I'm trying to, it's more of a professional sort of situation. I'm trying to have this guy at a party. Like sometimes it is just nice to say, yeah, I work in football, because then, what else do I want to talk to some random person about? Like, I want to hear your opinions about current events. Probably not. But like, if we could talk about, do you think Najee Harris is going to be a good fit with the Chargers or something random like that? Yeah, sure. That's probably a pretty decent topic of conversation in a casual setting.
How did you fall into your love of the football? And then specifically, how did you fall into your love of the wide receiver position?
Yeah, definitely two separate questions. In terms of just fall in love with football, that's actually kind of hard to say because I grew up, I'm in Virginia now. I lived in LA for 10 years, but I grew up here in Virginia. So I kind of started watching football. I grew up a Panthers fan because my family's all from North Carolina. It's where we're like originally from, but that was a tough enough existence. But I mean, I spent a lot of my formative years watching some really, really awful Washington teams, like Jason Campbell checking it down to Mike Sellers in the flat, the fullback at the time. So I don't really know why I love football, but no, I mean, I've just always been drawn to the game, and, for all the reasons that everyone loves it. It's such a unique sport. I think there's so many little micro interactions on the football field, and, all 11 players kind of have to work as one, and that sort of dovetails into why I love the receiver position. Number one, I never had the athletic ability, frame, or frankly weight to play wide receiver growing up, but Steve Smith was my favorite player growing up, so I was always drawn to wide receivers. But specifically, like why I ended up diving into the receiver position is because they are one of the more interesting and unique micro interactions on the field in terms of like getting open and getting separation. That's something the wide receiver can control, but getting production is something they don't have full control over, because obviously, this, Brian, all your listeners and viewers know this, that, the wide receiver is so inherently dependent on outside variables to accrue production. You got to get a football thrown your way. It's got to be an accurate football. The offensive line's got to protect the quarterback in order to give them that time. The system has to be set up for the player to succeed. So all of those things are kind of outside of the wide receiver's control. So I was so fascinated, like trying to find a way to isolate wide receivers from those surrounding variables, which is how reception perception came to be.
For people that are less familiar with reception perception, I want to take a second to put up like kind of what's become your calling card. These visual charts of
Mhm.
route trees and what works, what doesn't for a given receiver. Um, this is Matthew Golden. And talk about how you came to first build your first route tree diagram like this.
Yeah, the first ones look horrible compared to these, which I think are, this is, I think, actually the fourth iteration of the route chart. So they've certainly gotten better than when I was doing it by myself in Photoshop, because graphic design is, whatever you think of my football work, it's better than what I do in terms of graphic design. So
I hear you, man.
yeah, in terms of the route chart, it's just like one piece of the puzzle, really, when we're looking at what a reception perception profile is on a player. So what I go in and I do is, over an 8-game sample for NFL or college prospects, obviously, as we're looking at here with Matthew Golden, I chart every single snap that they take in that 8-game sample, where they line up, which I didn't put enough emphasis on early, that basically everything has to start with role and alignment. And especially once we get talking about the Seahawks here, that's really going to come into focus. So where they line up, outside, slot, off the line of scrimmage, on the line of scrimmage, are they that X receiver, flanker, slot? Do they take snaps from the backfield? I also chart every single route that they run, which is obviously where these graphics are born out of. What I'm trying to do there is, how often do they get open against man, zone, press coverage? How often do they get open on each individual route type, which is the chart that we're looking at here with Matthew Golden? And I think this really describes his game pretty well. Sometimes the route chart alone doesn't necessarily give us the best view of who a wide receiver is. You really have to dig deep. I actually think with Golden, the route chart does a pretty good job of distilling who he is as a player. To me, and why I don't necessarily think he is, jumping ahead on him, I don't necessarily think he is a true tier 1 wide receiver prospect.
Thank you.
Is because, like, the success rate on these curls and comebacks, the base routes of an NFL receiver, like, you're going to pile up production there. If you're going to be a reliable number 1 target in offense, you got to be a high-end separator on those patterns. But where Golden's really dangerous, where I think his route running is best expressed, is down the field, especially in the intermediate area. I mean, that success rate on digs and outs of 80.6% and 78.6% respectively, that's where he really shines, man. And especially against zone coverage, he can really snap those routes off and get open. So I think he is somebody that fits really well as like a great number 2 across from an elite number 1. Think of like Jordan Addison with the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, if he could find himself in a situation like that, I think that would be perfect for Golden. So that's kind of how you use this route chart to sort of describe who a player is. And of course, there's many other metrics that go into the full profile.
What was the first player profile you did where doing this work kind of revealed something to you that you didn't know? You're like, oh, wow, I got to do this more because I didn't know that about that player.
Yeah, so to kind of take it back to the beginning and sort of just a little bit of background here, reception perception, the first articles went up prior to the 2014 season, but the first year, and because I was kind of back testing it and really trying to see, like, okay, where does the sample need to end in terms of, like, this is representative of a full season, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to, as one guy, chart every single snap that every single player took. So I was kind of doing that mostly in 2013. Then summer of 2014, I put out the first articles, but the first year I collected league-wide data, or close to it in terms of like high-end relevant receivers, was that 2014 season. And during that, obviously, was like, let's investigate these rookies, because that was a great rookie class that came in. And there were some big names, I actually think, if in terms of a player that first, like, just really drew me to, like, I think I'm on the right track here, was Odell Beckham that year. Like, I was doing some work on him before he had, the catch. And I was like, man, this guy is just absolutely, like, obliterating coverage. He's just, he's dominating in isolation. And that felt really nice to see, that as soon as then he has that national, game everybody's watching against the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. And obviously he went on to explode from there. But really probably the first time where I was like, this means something, and we're getting in a, like, directionally accurate sort of path here was Allen Robinson that year. Probably the first like real big hit of reception perception, where if you just look at him in his 2014 rookie season, there's nothing special from a statistical perspective. He actually wasn't even the first wide receiver drafted by the Jaguars that year. Marquise Lee was drafted ahead of him. Allen Hurns as a UDFA had a couple of nice moments, but when you looked at his reception perception data from that 2014 rookie season, he was getting open at the same rate of some top level wideouts that year. And it's like, okay, if this all comes together, like he's sitting on, I remember the title of the article, is sitting on the precipice of a massive breakout. He goes on to lead the NFL in touchdowns the next year, 14, 15 that year. So that felt like just, okay, we're getting somewhere if this is what this is telling us.
I would have loved to have seen a Doug Baldwin reception perception profile back in the day. Do you ever chart Doug?
Yes, I was going to say, if there's a reason we call our top tier subscription on the website the Sicko tier, because you get with the Sicko tier, you get access to all the historical data. Every player I've ever charted is in that database. So there's 3 seasons of Doug Baldwin, 2015, 2016, 2017, remarkably consistent player. Because again, if you want to look at, like, what does Doug Baldwin look like? Yeah, you're probably a little bit of a sicko. That's why we lovingly call it.
Oh, you know it.
Yeah. So it's 3 straight seasons, 69.1% success rate versus man, 69.1% success rate versus man, 69.3% success rate versus man coverage. Really high quality zone beater as well. And I loved his release moves off the line of scrimmage. Again, some of his scores were like remarkably consistent. Doug Baldwin from 2015 to 2017. So I was a big fan of his, and he was kind of the original kind of prototype of that vertical slot receiver. You know, I always talk about with slot receivers, there's your vertical guys, there's like the bunny hop slot receiver, thinking about like a Jamison Crowder type of slot receiver, maybe Jarvis Landry kind of fits into that. And then there's that power slot, the bigger slot receiver. We'll be talking about one of those guys today, I know, with Seattle, but Doug Baldwin was kind of that original forefather of the vertical slot player. So I always had like a real affinity for him, and Tyler Lockett too, who did some of that as well. I mean, Lockett's another one of those guys that was a delayed gratification reception perception player, because his rookie season was, I mean, fantastic. At the time, one of the top 2 success rate versus man coverage scores I had right after Odell Beckham. And I was like, this guy he's the next one, right? He's the next breakout guy. But it didn't happen for like a few years with him because of
the injury. It kind of derailed things.
Exactly. So it was just like, if he can get healthy, man, he can really have that moment. It was probably like 2018 where it finally started to all come together for him.
Well, so I talked about it at the top, and I can't delay it any longer. I know that it's been a topic for you on your show. And by the way, folks, go over to Reception Perception, sign up there. Also, the pod over on the YouTube channel has a criminally low number of subscribers. You gotta go over there. I think they've just gotten started, so it's going to be massive very, very soon. But you guys, I know, talked about the changes that the Seahawks have made at the receiver position. And a lot of the conversation, I think, centered around Cooper Kupp and whether there's still any juice left to squeeze. And if you could talk a little bit about the transformation, talk about DK Metcalf going out, and whether, first, do you see him as a player that was worth the contract that he signed? And then second, talk about, Cooper Kupp, JSN, MVS as this cobbled together receiver room that the Seahawks have now ended up with, and where the Seahawks have to go with what they've got.
Yeah, I think Metcalf, to answer that question first, like, I've always been a big fan of DK Metcalf's game. He is kind of the peak. And whenever I talk about receivers, I'm always going to talk about these archetypes and like families that guys belong to, because my favorite part about analyzing the position is that not everybody's got WR next to their name, but I mean, shoot, they could play the game completely different. Like, watch DK Metcalf play and Cooper Kupp play. Even when Cooper Kupp is at his peak, they're not doing the same thing at all. They might as well be playing 2 different positions, even though they run routes and catch the football, right? Score touchdowns, get yards, all things of that nature. But with Metcalf, I was always a big fan of his game. He's kind of like the peak archetype of that straight line X receiver. It's probably not the most diverse route tree in the world, but man, the routes that he runs, he's really good on. So I've always been an admirer of his in that way. One thing that I has always stood out with Metcalf is just that I thought, again, he was better off the line of scrimmage and given credit for, but I don't think he had his best season last year. From a contested catch standpoint, he took a step back. Probably his worst season from a contested contested catch standpoint in reception perception. And overall, like separation wise, it just wasn't his best year. So at his peak, I think he's probably still a guy I might not necessarily consider to be a $30+ million receiver. So I kind of understood the decision for Seattle to move on, especially coming off like a down season. What they've done next has been interesting because bringing in Cooper Kupp, like I said, he doesn't replace what DK Metcalf has taken out the door with him at all, nor does he really replace what Tyler Lockett had been giving them for several years. He's kind of his own thing. Even Cooper Kupp in the early portion of his career, before he was this dominant receiver where he was, putting up Triple Crown numbers and things like that, he was still a very unique guy, like almost would do like some tight end stuff at the receiver position. Again, he's probably the forefather or one of the forefathers of that power slot archetype where he's like chipping defensive ends before he gets out into the route. I think now at this point in his career, like we've seen a steady decline in terms of his reception perception numbers the last 2 seasons. I mean, he owned that Triple Crown season, 91.4% success rate versus zone, which is an unbelievable number. It's the second best I've ever charted, second only to Antonio Brown in one of his earlier seasons. He's not quite that player anymore. Like he's still a average zone beater, like especially in the short and underneath area. And I can kind of get myself to a point where you see, oh man, he's just so good for Sam Darnold and sort of those outlet receptions. Like as a guy who Sam can get a little quick brained when the pressure gets on, like that guy's always just going to be open in the flat, but I don't think he gives you a lot down the field or as a perimeter player. I mean, he at this point, his man and press numbers indicate that he is a guy who needs to play in the slot, which brings us to Jackson Smith-Njigba. I'm curious where you're at with him because I really liked him as a prospect. Maybe again, another guy that wasn't like a clear-cut top 10 receiver like some of the other players we've seen in recent years, but my favorite receiver in that class, a clear-cut first-round player, and a much better man coverage beater than he was given credit for. And last season, this is not reception perception, but from a yards per route run standpoint, he led all like high volume receivers with 4.56 yards per route run against man coverage from week 10 on. So I think once they started to flow the offense through him, they saw like this guy is much more dynamic than just a typical slot presence.
Yeah, it's been interesting with JSN and a lot of folks. I think there's still going to be this, he's going to have a prove it season where people are like, hey, let's see what he can do without DK Metcalf drawing coverage. Well, he actually did that last season for a few games and did pretty darn well without DK Metcalf. And even when DK Metcalf came back, he was not the same player after the injury. So yeah, I think JSN's one of those guys that defies the notion of slot or outside. He's just a damn good receiver. He runs good routes. He's got good hands. He finds the openings. And the other thing that I'm curious if you see it the same way, Matt, is like there's a lot of hand wringing going on. How many slot receivers can you have? They can't have all these slots. But you look at Clint Kubiak's offense, it's a lot of condensed formations. There's a lot of space to be running. There's a lot of motion. I'm not sure that there's going to be this pileup in the slot the way that some people think. I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
That was literally going to be my next point, is that I think sometimes in this particular offense, like guys off this tree, we tend to overstate slot and outside because of the condensed formations and the stacks and things like that. I mean, even Cooper Kupp at times, like you could put him on the line of scrimmage as the slot player and have like JSN right out, like as the farthest outside guy, he'd be the nominal flanker here off the line of scrimmage, and like switch release those players at the line of scrimmage to create mismatches so that you bring out the best in both of them. But I think because like you're not gonna line JSN up like he's Julio Jones in this offense. It's like the boundary backside X receiver. Like that's not what you're going to do, but you can have him as even Deebo Samuel, if we're talking like 49ers, Clint Kubiak comes from the Shanahan tree, all things like that. I mean, his last name is literally Kubiak, it's right off that tree.
Yeah.
Like Deebo Samuel was a guy who he had kind of like a slot receiver profile in reception perception, but was an outside receiver because they could stack and condense. The key thing here is if you're going to have a player like that as the guy that you're funneling targets through, which I think you can, you do have to have what I've kind of, it started as a joke and now I just think it is like a player archetype to me, like a sacrificial X receiver, which brings us to MVS. Like, yes, ideally, do you want him to be playing a full-time role? Like, all respect to MVS, I would say not necessarily. You don't want him to be a guy that's out there on the field all the time, but when he's on the field, he's going to stretch it out for other guys and like bring you a very, very like diet version of what DK Metcalf did from a coverage drawing perspective, because you're going to clear that space out for these guys to do all the fun things underneath. And every now and again, if you have an aggressive quarterback who likes the looks, maybe he, alerts that go route and he throws it to MVS. Now, I think there are prospects in this draft that maybe could push MVS to be like a little bit more than just a sacrificial X receiver, but that role, whether it's a high targeted player or not, like if you're just getting your cardio in out there, it is critical to having an offense like this work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that was my initial read on the MVS signing. And obviously not a big dollar number, not had a particularly successful career. But then when I dug in and I watched his 8 starts with the Saints and Kubiak, I'm like, he might be more than that. Like, what happened? And actually, I talked to him about this. He said that Keith Williams, the wide receiver coach for the Saints, the best wide receiver coach he ever had, and really talked to him about basically run every route, whether or not you're the primary or secondary, as if you are the primary. And that sounds so simple, but for whatever reason, that was an unlock for MVS. And he was pretty productive. 4 touchdowns and 7 starts, which he's only had 6 touchdowns.
I host a fantasy show for Yahoo during the season, and every week we kind of had this conversation like, do we want to like start the MVS like really on this zombie Saints team? But he kept getting so much usage and was producing with it too. Like he would just pop up for touchdowns. So yeah, I do think that's an interesting point. Like if there's just more to him, because I think players end up getting a bad rap when they put the football on the ground, especially when you put the football on the ground when you 2 of your quarterbacks are 2 of the best at their 2 of the best we've ever seen in Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. But like there is a tactical use to him for sure. Like there's no question he brings that tactical use, and I was definitely impressed with what he did last year with the Saints.
You mentioned some prospects that could potentially push him, and I'm going to ask you about one, and then I'm going to open it up because I'm sure there's a lot of others. And if you don't hit them, I'll ask you about them. This is a later, not top of the draft kind of guy, but Dante Thornton has caught my eye as 6'4.5", 4'3". He's very limited from like what routes he's going to win on. He's kind of a 9 route guy as far as I can tell. Any thoughts on Dante Thornton? And if you go off from there, other guys that you think fit that kind of X stretch kind of route tree?
Yeah, Dante Thornton. I will say, just charting the Tennessee offense, not usually my favorite because there's not a lot of translatable stuff there from the NFL perspective. But that being said, I have 3 games on him. He will be in the rookie roundup, which we'll post right before the draft. Basically, it's kind of guys that probably are going to be day 3 options, which I think Thornton will be, and just little mini looks at them. But in those 3 games, 88.7% snaps on the line of scrimmage, so he certainly qualifies as that X receiver, big bodied guy. The route tree is very vertically inclined. It's very curl, but again, that's what we're looking at here. And I do think you see a lot of ability with him to maybe not have fully maximized his speed as a stretch receiver, but like working back to the football, I think he showed a little bit there. Decent ball skills. Like he'd be a project guy that probably isn't ready to contribute in year 1, but would be somebody that is tantalizing from a tools perspective to take later in day 3. And I think there's kind of a lot of options that fit that arc, like that X receiver archetype, maybe sacrificial, but maybe like straight line in this class. One I'll highlight earlier in the draft is Tre Harris out of Ole Miss. James and I actually just talked about him recently on the podcast. Video is going to post on it on YouTube as well. And he definitely fits in that straight line X receiver archetype that you'd hope is a little more than sacrificial. Like I said, DK Metcalf is probably the peak of this archetype. And similar to DK coming out of Ole Miss, obviously he's coming out of Ole Miss too, is Tre Harris. I don't mean to just helmet scout here. But like he had that same sort of, he would every now and again flash some real nuance as a route runner on the routes that they asked him to run over and over and over again, because his route tree is very stripped down as well. Over 50% of his routes were 9 curl screen. So that is very stripped down. Ole Miss is kind of like a bit of, it's not like Tennessee, like Looney Tunes offense. There's a little bit more to it than that, but it's a lot of like high hit plays over and over and over again. So I do think Tre Harris, though, because he shows the flashes, I like taking him in the second round just because he certainly is going to be a sacrificial guy for you. But I think there's potential for him to go a little bit farther down that straight line archetype. There are warning signs in his profile that he's kind of similar to like a Terrace Marshall, who was a total flame out with the Panthers in this regard. But they also kind of tried to move him to the slot. It was a little bit of weird usage there. Ultimately, again, he's on his 4th NFL team. Like, it didn't work out with Terrace Marshall. So the floor on this type of player is low. But I do think even if you get a guy like Alec Pierce, who is a sacrificial X, but again, they've got a quarterback in Indianapolis who he's got the stones and the arm to throw those deep passes every now and again. You can maybe get something out of him there. A couple other options too down the line. Andrew Armstrong out of Arkansas. I was actually just talking to EJ Snyder and Brett Coleman for a video that's going to post on their channel, the Bootleg Football Show. And EJ said like, hey, and he lives up in Seattle. He's like, hey, Andrew Armstrong, future Seahawks like X receiver. And I think that makes a lot of sense. He's weirdly a bit better of a zone beater than a man beater, but good hands, will make some plays after the catch. He's another guy I wouldn't mind betting on if we're talking about strictly day 3 potential X receivers. I do kind of like a little bit of what he brings to the table.
Yeah, it's interesting. Both those guys, over 6'2", 40 times, in the 4.5s, which is not necessarily what you think of as, a stretch the field kind of 40, but both of them have been incredibly successful, especially Tre Harris has been a really big play for Jackson Dart over his career. So, excuse me. I got to ask you about a couple wide receiver pairs. There's the TCU guys and the Iowa State guys. And the Seahawks have had Savion Williams in for a visit. Jack Bech obviously was at the Senior Bowl. They've met with him. And then you've got Jaden Higgins and Jaylin Noel. Higgins is another guy that kind of fits, at least from a physical profile, that X kind of position. What's your thought on those 4 players?
Yeah, so the Iowa State guys, I'm a much bigger fan of Jaylin Noel than I am Jaden Higgins. Noel's just my type, man. He's another one of these vertical slots, right? His success rate versus man coverage actually pretty similar to Ladd McConkey last year, but I think as like a full profile standpoint, he compares a little bit better to Josh Downs, who, man, I think Josh Downs could be much further maximized in a different situation than he is. I was a huge Josh Downs fan in that draft, had him ranked ahead of Quentin Johnson and several of the guys that he went behind in the 3rd round. So Jaylin Noel is just like my type. I think he brings better contested catch chops than you think for a player of his size. Jaden Higgins, I appreciate his hands, catches everything when he's uncovered, solid zone beater, but he fits into this bucket. And you mentioned my YouTube channel. I did a solo breakdown on this with Keon Coleman last year because he fit into this archetype of receivers. These guys that are sub 35th percentile success rate versus man and press players as college prospects, which Jaden Higgins falls into. I just don't think he gets stuck at the top of his routes. He's not the best separator versus man. All those guys that have gone on to be what I'd say like our high-end consistent starters, they all have moved into be big slot receivers in the NFL. I'm talking Juju Smith-Schuster, Rashee Rice, Amon-Ra St. Brown, even Cooper Kupp was this guy, like a perimeter player outside in college who didn't really necessarily beat man coverage, but you move him into the slot and his skills against zone and like the fluidity is expressed in that way. So I think Higgins, to me, I just rank him a little bit lower because I don't know what his next coaching staff is going to think about him. Like the Keon Coleman example is a good one. I felt very similar about him last year. The Bills basically never played Keon in the slot. And of course they have Khalil Shakir, who's a great slot receiver. So I understand that part of it, but, and again, he was never like a truly high targeted player. So that's just the kind of situation with him. But at the same time, I do think that you look at the TCU guys, Jack Bech is a potential power slot player, but man, he beats man coverage. He is awesome against man, especially underneath. Definitely not a deep threat. Like his 9-route corner route success rate is not good. He's not a downfield player, but he is a guy who gets open underneath and in the intermediate area, catches everything, way better after the catch than you think. So I'm a big Jack Bech fan. I do kind of want him to go to a place where they don't have that power slot receiver, and they kind of know how to use that player. I'm thinking Jacksonville with Liam Cohen. And then Savion Williams is a guy who is, he's a guy who is just like more of a project and probably more of like a joker, like a move around guy. But he does have some decent hands. Could he end up being like a Laviska Shenault, who I know had a moment with the Seattle Seahawks, but obviously didn't work out with the Jaguars or the Panthers either.
Yeah. We're up against. Do you have one more minute, or you got to run?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I got to be honest, Matt. I know you're a receiver guy, or else you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. I like receivers. They're just fine. If the Seahawks draft a receiver at 18, I feel like I'm going to lose my mind. And I need you to do one of two things. Either convince me that there is a receiver that is worth passing on offensive linemen, passing on edge players, passing on corners to take at 18, or reassure me that, no, there is not. You're right. That Seahawks should not go that direction. Where do you fall with that particular pick?
Well, it depends on the player, obviously, right? Like if Tetra McMillan fell to 18, I do think he's, an X receiver prospect, and like that's the guy you really complete this receiver core. Honestly, like I wouldn't hate that at all. I doubt he falls that far. I'd be surprised, even though in some big media mocks, which it's on my radar that they've had him come down a little bit, but I'd still be a little surprised. But that I wouldn't hate. Even Matthew Golden, like I could squint at it and kind of see what they're doing here, but I'm a little bit with you that if I was a Seahawks fan, I'd be a little annoyed if they took a receiver in the first round. Like again, Matthew Golden, I think is good. And I'm not low on Matthew Golden. I just think as we broke it down at the top that I think he's best as a number 2 across from a dominant number 1. And I don't think he's necessarily an X receiver. I think he's a guy that you'd want to move around as a flanker. It's not redundant from a verticality standpoint because JSN is not necessarily a guy that's going to take the top off like Golden. But in terms of a deployment perspective, I'm really stretching my brain here a little bit as to how we're getting all 3 of these guys on the field. I mean, to be honest, Cooper Kupp is probably a 1-year deal. I'd be a little surprised if he's on the team in 26 and certainly 27. But nevertheless, I think you can find some of what you're missing in this receiver room on day 2, even in not necessarily into day 3, but I think the guys on day 2, there's a wealth of really interesting options. So if I was a Seahawks fan, I wouldn't say I'd lose my mind if they took Golden at 18 necessarily, but you're obviously more invested in this than I am.
Yes.
I would be, I'd be a little bit more like, let's have a meat and potatoes first few picks in this draft. Cause I think that's kind of where they're needy.
You've said it a couple of times. And I just want to make sure before you leave, we get clarity from you here. What's the kind of the prototypical receiver that would complete the Seahawks receiver room as you see it? What are the characteristics that you're looking for when you say this receiver fits that?
Yeah, I think an X receiver who can handle press man coverage as that boundary guy. Like number 1, we do want him clearing out space because I'm very, very bullish on JSN. Like I loved him as a prospect, and I think he has the ability to be maybe not an elite receiver in the NFL, but a guy that is right kind of on that next group of players. I think he's just fantastic. And I think he really, truly broke out to a high degree last year, right? Kind of in a moment when some in the national perspective were maybe willing to be like, all right, he's just a little mid, or maybe he's not that guy.
Yeah.
And that's exactly when he turned it on. And really it was just watching him. I'm like, man, he was fine as a rookie, over 70% success rate versus man. You just got to throw him the football more and make him the number 1 read in the concept. When they did that, I think the results were great. So I'm very bullish on him. So I don't necessarily think you need to hit a home run with this receiver pick, but I do think it's an X receiver who can handle press man coverage and can not just stretch out the defense, but also offer you like hey, when we get that one-on-one look, we're going to take that and this guy can deliver on it.
Matt, you are the best. You're the best in the business at what you do. Thank you so much for coming on. Tell people where they can find you and what's coming up on Reception Perception.
Appreciate it, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. receptionperception.com. We've dropped a ton of profiles so far. We have more coming. Some will drop on Monday. And then that rookie roundup post that I mentioned will be up before the draft as well. So last year in a much more loaded receiver class, I got to 23 prospects fully charted out on the website. We're going to beat that number this year, which, maybe curious decision considering the class is a little bit less like hyped up. But I'm, always committed to offering more and more every season. So I'm excited about the guys we've got coming up. I mean, get excited about some Isaac TeSlaa out of Arkansas, a guy with like no production.
He's on my list. I saw him at the Senior Bowl and I was looking, I don't know, man, his not his charting numbers, but his
athletic testing, man,
athletic testing
is
numbers.
absurd.
It was crazy. I was like, who is this guy?
I tweeted about it. Mock Draftable, his comparisons are like Allen Robinson, Roma Dunze, Javon Walker, Andre Johnson, and yet the guy he has like dominated Hillsdale College, no production at Arkansas, really, like under I think 900 receiving yards the last 2 years, not very many touchdowns. But I think the traits show up on film. He'd be somebody I would love to take in the 7th round, and maybe be like a 6th, 7th round, and be like, hey, let's try to develop this guy into the next like sneaky slot receiver.
Matt, we are simpatico here. Love it. Hopefully you're still a Washington Commanders fan. Terry McLaurin's one of the best receivers out there to watch, and I'm sure you enjoy watching Scary Terry do his thing. All right, Matt, thank you so much. Make sure everybody checks him out, and have a great rest of your day, Matt.
Appreciate it, man.
All right, that is Matt Harmon. Honestly, man, just inspirational content that he has created out of nowhere. And in a world full of aggregated data, this guy is doing manual charting of these receivers and coming up with, I think, innovative, unique, novel kind of reviews of these players and adding to the conversation, which in this day and age where so much is just recycled fluff and empty content, I think Matt does a really good job. Now, I will warn you, if you go check out their YouTube channel, and you should, there is a good segment that he and his co-host did on the Seahawks receiver room, and his co-host absolutely hates what the Seahawks have done and was just trashing them. And then what's the best way to describe it? A very negative, I guess, is the best, most positive way I could put it, but a very negative conversation about Cooper Kupp and how much he seemed to be in decline from their charting information. And it was an eye opener for me. So I recommend you go listen to it, because just listening to everyone say things are great and things are fine is not the best way to really brace yourself for, an anticipation of what your Seahawks team is going to look like. But we'll see. I mean, basically the sum of it was Cooper Kupp is in decline, and that over the last couple of years, things have really dropped off. I already ran over with Matt, or I would have asked more about this, because I was curious if whether the end of the season where Cooper Kupp really took a fall, how much that influenced those numbers. But he basically said Cooper Kupp cannot be used against, man coverage effectively. He did okay against zone, but is basically league average, and was essentially below league average success rate in almost every route you run. And that Sean McVay is pretty ruthless about moving on from players when he feels like they've peaked, and that you've got a player there that nobody knows better than Sean McVay and the Rams. And they didn't just move on from Cooper Kupp. They brought in an older receiver in Devontae Adams. So it was a pretty scathing, kind of ruthless move. And then from there, they also mentioned the fact, like Liam Cohen, who had been a offensive coordinator, and you've got some of the guys that have been with the Rams, I think now running the Jacksonville Jaguars GM. They didn't get in on Cooper Kupp. So another team that really knows him well and needs actually the role that Cooper Kupp plays did not go in on him. So I think it's worth at least keeping eyes open about what does that mean? Cooper Kupp will tell you he feels like he's every bit the player he's been. There is data that says otherwise. There are league moves that say otherwise. And it's going to be one of the question marks. And so if the Seahawks know that, if the Seahawks are entering this kind of knowing that Cooper Kupp may not be the player that he has been, then I think their approach to this draft will be much different, because I think they'll be much more aggressive with receiver than I think even we've been discussing. And the mock drafts that have the Seahawks going at 18 with Tet McMillan or with Matthew Golden or, something else to that effect become more plausible. As much as I don't want that to be what they do, if the Seahawks feel like they basically have one receiver in the room and then a couple of guys that are short-term rentals that may or may not be good enough to be a functional receiver room, they're going to feel a lot of pressure to bring in more talent to that room. I think no matter what, they want to add to that room. No matter what, they want to bring in an X. There's just no question. I thought it was interesting hearing from Matt that Jayden Higgins for him is not the prototypical X. Even though he's 6'4", he's got the size. He sees him more as someone who's going to come inside. He doesn't win against man. He doesn't win at the top of routes. I think that was interesting. I actually liked what I saw from Jayden Higgins in terms of releases at the line in the Senior Bowl, but I also trust Matt's opinion a lot more than I trust mine in that regard. Jack Bech, also interesting to see him as potentially also a little bit of a slot guy, but also someone who wins a little bit more underneath. A lot of the things I've seen from Jack Bech, downfield, he's not going to run away from guys, but he's going to he uses his body really well. He makes contested catches. So that was a guy that I've been pretty high on as a really good get for them. But hearing Matt talk about Tre Harris being a really good fit, I think that's one to watch. Certainly was a deep threat guy with Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. 6'2". In case you're curious, Tre Harris, 6'2", 205 pounds, has a 92nd percentile RAS score, 4.54 40-yard dash, which is not great. Honestly, it's not terrible, but it's not really great. But his vertical, 38.5 inches, which is 91st percentile, broad jump, 10 feet, 84th percentile. So he's got some of the explosion, even if he doesn't have the top shelf speed. The other guy that he mentioned, Andrew Armstrong, haven't spent a lot of time on Andrew Armstrong. He's from plays for Arkansas, 6'3.5", 202 pounds, and ran a 4.5 140. So his 40 is 72nd percentile. It's not like the top shelf speed, but he does have a 37.5 inch vert, 85th percentile. He's an interesting player. I love that he brought up Isaac TeSlaa on his own. You guys have heard me talk about Isaac TeSlaa and probably wondered why, but that was validating to hear Matt go on about him as a day 3 guy that I think is absolutely worth a look. And then, Jaylin Noel universally is loved. This guy, if you haven't seen the interview with Jaylin Noel, check it out on the channel. It's great to have him on. I think just a very good all-around receiver. Can actually take the top off, can win underneath, can get you some yards after catch. Also is a returner. So, I think Jaylin Noel, really great ad. He's just not necessarily a prototypical X. He's been a slot primarily, and he can probably play the flanker thing, but that there's going to be a lot of overlap there if you add another him. I think his physical profile is very different than JSN. Him running in the 4.3s and the 40 is different than JSN. And so I think that maybe he could be a complementary player in that, and maybe he could take over from Cooper Kupp after a year. But it's hard for me to just pass on a good player because you're not exactly sure how they fit. I think Jaylin Noel is just one of the best receivers in this class. And if you don't add him, someone else is going to get one of the best receivers in this class. And I think generally speaking, dynamic athletes who are also great route runners and good guys and have good hands, like, you're not going to be sad that you add a player like that, I don't think. Now, we talk about the 18th pick overall. Tet McMillan is the is probably the best fit for what the Seahawks need. And you heard Matt talk about him completing the room. You also heard Matt generally agreeing that it's probably not the best thing for the Seahawks to do. So, we will find out together very soon. I'll actually be seeing our GM and president of football operations later tonight. I will probably not ask him about any of these things, but we also will get a chance to talk to John Schneider and Mike McDonald on Monday at their pre-draft press conference. So that'll be good. And then next week, man, is it really just a week away from the draft? Is that right? NFL draft dates. Yes, we are a week away from the draft. Oh my gosh. Unbelievable. We're finally here. And for the draft, folks, I will be at the VMAC, live from the VMAC. We'll have Jeff Simmons and Nathan Ernst and probably Evan and whoever else we end up on the live stream for that. So you'll be able to hang out with us as we've done every year. You'll hear our reactions immediately. There will be no hiding from you'll see exactly and hear how we react to each pick along the way. And I'm going to be there for every pick. That's the plan. We'll see if things change, but that's the plan as of now. So really looking forward to hanging out with you all next week. And also I have launched the Hawk Blogger 2025 draft prediction game. And all you got to do is go to patreon.com/hawkblogger to follow the instructions there. Or if you are a YouTube club level member or higher, I posted on the channel today on the community tab, on the posts tab, instructions for how to get access to the spreadsheet. We'll be giving away a Real Hawk Talk sweatshirt to the winner this year. And last year, Caleb Epp was the winner, the draft guru. He tied with Jeff Simmons and Derek Gebby for the top score. It's a fun game. We'll play it. We play it where we're going to give you points for how many picks you get correct, whether they're the right position or not. Like, so basically, if there's 32 players picked in the first round, if you pick 25 of those players, but they're not in the right spot, you'll still get a point. So you're one part of this is guessing the players that get picked in the first round. You also get a lot more points. I think you get 5 points if you get an exact match. So Cam Ward, number 1, I'm not hopefully giving anything away. Very likely to be a good way to get some points early on. That gets you not only a point for getting the name of a player that got drafted in the first round, but you also get 5 points for getting an exact match. And then the last thing is you get to predict trades. So predict which slots are traded. You get points for predicting trades as well. So take a look at that. Have some fun with it. I may make some adjustments here later after I get off this show, but it is open for business. So you can go in there and please, please, please make sure you add your name to the scoring sheet. You will not get your score taken if you don't add your name to the scoring sheet. So follow all the instructions in that sheet in order to do it. All right, folks, if you haven't already, give the show a like and click subscribe. Please do. And really, really appreciate everyone who's been doing that. Also, want to acknowledge like everybody who's doing reviews over on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. All that stuff has been really great. And I do want to acknowledge, like, there was a review this morning. You know, almost everything has been 5-star and positive, and it's great. Got a review this morning. It says, talks too slow and keeps repeating himself, spends time begging for 5-star reviews instead of improving his delivery, spends too much time telling us what he's going to talk about later. Show is significantly better with another person on. Great content is what keeps this from being 1 star. If you want 5 stars, make this a 5-star worthy podcast. You know what? I think that is a totally fine opinion to have. My only ask is if you're going to give a less than 5-star review, shoot me a note. Let's talk about it. It's hard to overcome lower reviews as we're trying to push up the review. If you don't like what you're getting, I'm always open to feedback. And in fact, there's a person talking to me about some stuff on YouTube where we've got some funky stuff happening. I'm trying to talk to YouTube about it to make it better. But I appreciate someone taking the time to do the review. I would just really appreciate if you're not going to give a 5-star review, just shoot me a note and let's hash it out there, and then let's get as many 5-star reviews as we can to keep bringing up that score. I really, really appreciate everyone who's taking the time to do that. All right. I think that is largely like the main things I wanted to cover. There are a couple things that if you didn't listen to Real Hawk Talk last night, I highly recommend it. We went 2 hours. We picked the first 17 picks. It was a lot of fun. Nathan Ernst, Jeff Simmons, and I, we had a blast. Hopefully you enjoy that and check it out. As we look at what's coming up, tomorrow, I will be with Ryan Fowler. Welcome him back from the Draft Network. Haven't talked to Ryan for a while. He's super plugged in. Going to be great to get his perspective on how things are going as we count down until the draft. Then there is Saturday. Jeff Simmons and I will do Seahawks Saturday. And then Sunday, we're going to have the draft roundtable with C-Mike Spin Move, Griff Sturgeon, as well as Rob Staten. So a lot of great stuff coming. I did want to do one thing before I go. I had forgotten that there was Dane Brugler's 7-round mock. And Jeff talked about it yesterday that he just couldn't bring himself to read it. I want to read it. I'm not going to read every single pick, obviously. He does literally 257 picks. The guy's an animal. He is an absolute animal. But there's a few things that were interesting as we kind of go into this. So he has the Jaguars selecting Ashton Jeanty at 5, which is interesting. He has Mason Graham going to the Raiders. I absolutely think that that's possible. I think that was, if I had done something differently last night, that's probably one thing I would have switched, is having them go with Mason Graham. And then he has Ted McMillan going to the Saints at 9. So we'll see. We'll see if we had them going with the quarterback and Jackson Dart, which would be a wild swing. He's got Tyler Warren going to the Bears. I also think that's possible. He's got the 49ers taking Shamar Stewart at 11. And I'm really fascinated to see where Shamar Stewart goes in this draft. He does have Matthew Golden going to the Cowboys. That's who I think they're going to take. He's got Nickham and Worry going to the Dolphins. So we were debating that last night. And then Mike Green to the Falcons. I think everybody's got that. It's going to be funny if they go a different direction, because I'm assuming it's Mike Green at this point. He's got Michael Williams going to the Cardinals. I think that is such a likely direction for them. It so fits their profile, the Darius Robinson kind of edge rusher who I just don't think is that great of an athlete, which I think limits his upside. He's got Derek Harmon going to the Bengals, which I was arguing for last night, and that's going to be my pick when I do my prediction. And he's got Gray Zabel going to the Seahawks at 18. I'm really curious how Gray Zabel ends up. It just would not shock me if he ends up falling into the second round, even though he's had such a great pre-draft process. Small school player, excuse me. And you know what? Like, I don't know. I have it. I could see it happening. I would love them to pick Gray Zabel. I'd be fine with it if they did it. And then as he's got Shedeur Sanders going to the Steelers at 21. I still wonder if there's an opportunity for the Seahawks to make a deal with the Steelers if the Steelers want to go quarterback in the first round. Obviously, the Bucs and the Broncos are not going to take a quarterback, so they'd have to be convinced that the Seahawks are going to take a quarterback in order to trade up with them. But I do wonder about that. Kenneth Grant to the Chargers in the first round. Will Johnson all the way down to 23 to the Packers. And then Kelvin Banks all the way down at pick 27 to the Ravens. And that kind of were some of the things that stood out in the first round. He's got Jalen Milroe going and Jackson Dart going the first 2 picks of the second round. And I think that is where things are going to get kind of interesting. He's got Jayden Higgins early. He's got Tyler Shuck among the first 10 picks of the second round. So you got a lot of quarterbacks going in round 2. Tyleik Williams all the way up at pick 46. Jaylen Noel to the Cardinals. I actually think that's a good fit. He's got Azariah Thomas going, the cornerback, going to the Seahawks at 50. The Seahawks did meet with him at the combine. Azariah Thomas is not a man cover corner. He is a zone cover corner. I was not impressed with his movement at the combine. I'm not sold he's a guy that you spend a second round pick on. Then he's got them picking James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher, at 52. That is fascinating. For him to fall that far is fascinating. And then, I mean, there's a lot of questions about James Pierce Jr.'s kind of character and what he's like as a teammate. If for whatever reason they get past that and they think that they've got someone who can fit in the locker room, I mean, the speed's undeniable. There's some real question marks about him, but that would mean that they're passing on a lot of other guys in order to pick him, including Savon Ravel Jr., the corner. I'd rather them go Savon Ravel. They've got him going Dane's got him going at 62 to the Bills. He's got Tre Harris, Tate Ratledge going at the end of that round. Those are all guys I kind of would like to see earlier. He's got Donovan Jackson, by the way, going 48 to the Dolphins. A lot of teams kind of looking for what the Seahawks are looking for. And we're gonna have to write. Oh no, no, Dane, why did you do this to me? All right, in the third round, pick 82. Dane Brugler has the Seahawks picking Quinn Ewers, the quarterback. Dane, you're killing me, dude. Yeah, I won't be shocked. I don't want it. I do not want it, but I will not be shocked. He does have Jared Wilson going toward the top of the third round at pick 69. Kyle Williams, Jack Bech going back to back at 73 and 74 in the third round. He's got Ty Robinson all the way up there at 77. Pretty early, but could be. He's got Marcus Bowe at 79. Miles Frazier at 81. That's fascinating. I mean, I really like Miles Frazier. A lot of different mocks have him later. Terrence Ferguson, they have him later. I heard Dane and Daniel Jeremiah talking about Terrence Ferguson. They both see what I see. I really like this guy. I think he's going to be a good player. And then at 92, Dane's got them picking Savion Williams, the Joker. And you saw Matt Harmon's reaction when we talked about Savion Williams. Not a fan. If you're a receiver guy, you're not going to like watching Savion Williams play because he's not really a receiver. He's from a route running perspective, it's not pretty. And so I get it. The Seahawks have a 30 visit with him. They would have known him reasonably well. I don't know, man. Adding Savion Williams and James Pierce Jr., I'm not sure those are the types of guys necessarily that you want to add, but who knows? Jamari Caldwell, he has all the way in the end of the third round ahead of Omar Norman Lott. So that's interesting seeing Caldwell go this high. And then we get to round 4. By the way, he has Ashton Gillette going in the third round, the edge rusher. He's a guy I like. I've liked him as a day 3 guy, but interesting Dane's got him that much earlier. And then in round 4, there's a fun one. Forgotten name, JJ Pegues, the defensive tackle, also fullback and at times wildcat quarterback. That would be a lot of fun at pick 137 if the Seahawks got JJ Pegues. In the 4th round, he's got some other names worth calling out. He's got CJ West going ahead of the Seahawks, Chase Lunt going ahead, Jay Toia, the defensive tackle, the nose tackle we've talked about from UCLA, going at the top of the 4th round. He's got Cam Jackson, the nose tackle from Florida, going at the first pick of the 4th round. I'm not sure Cam Jackson to the Titans makes a lot of sense given that they just took Byron Murphy's teammate last year, who is similarly much larger than the average man. Then you've got guys like Jordan Phillips, Kyle McCord, Jeffrey Bassa, all going, Bryce Cabledew, all going ahead of the Seahawks pick in the 4th round. Then we get to the 5th round, and we see the Seahawks all the way down at pick 172. He has them. Dane has them taking Malachi Moore, the safety from Alabama, and then Molokai Matavo, the tight end from UCLA. So I talked to Molokai at the combine. Super good dude, known as kind of a blocking, hand in the dirt kind of tight end. 5th round's a little bit rich for me in that regard. But he's got David Walker going a pick after him, the edge rusher to the Ravens. I would much rather see a guy like David Walker. Of course, Dane did have the Seahawks taking James Pierce Jr. earlier, so maybe that is part of why. Then we get to the 6th round. The Seahawks don't have a pick here. And for what it's worth, he does have Clay Webb in this round. I like Clay Webb. I'd be happy to have him added later. Josh Gray is another name of a guy that both Daniel Jeremiah and Dane Brugler were defending yesterday as a better play. I like the way Joshua Gray moved at the combine. His center guard. I think he's an interesting later round guy. He's got Jayden Blue here in the 6th round, the running back. A lot of people seem to have him a little later. Ricky White, the receiver, he's got in the 6th round. Jalen Conyers, the kind of do-everything tight end wildcat quarterback in the 6th round. He's got Dante Thornton Jr., the wide receiver I mentioned in the 6th round. Jack Kaiser, similarly, in the 6th round. So he's got a lot of guys that I like later in this draft. And then finally, we get to the 7th round. He's got the Seahawks picking Issa Pohl, the tackle that has been on a 30 visit from Washington State. And then final pick, he's got Eugene Asante, the linebacker, going to the Seahawks at pick 234. So I don't know if I love that draft from Mr. Brugler. I mean, Gray Zabel at the top, fine. I don't know how I feel about Azariah. I do know how I feel. Azariah Thomas and James Pierce Jr. That's not my favorite 2nd round combo. I'll have to let Dane know about that. 3rd round pick on Quinn Ewers would be rough. Savion Williams is a real roll of the dice. I don't like. There's too much risk in this draft for me. I think Quinn Ewers has a super low floor. I think Savion Williams has a super low floor. I think James Pierce Jr. has a pretty low floor. I think Azariah Thomas has a low floor. And so I don't like the upside of Dane's draft, but it's fun to read and I respect the hell out of Dane. So with all that, I will now let you guys get on with your day. I will do the same. And make sure you sign over at patreon.com/hawkblogger, join the draft prediction show, or upgrade to a club level or higher YouTube membership, and you can get access as well. Love to see you there. We will give away a real Hawk Talk sweatshirt to the winner. So countdown to the draft continues. I will see you all tomorrow with Ryan Fowler from the Draft Network. Take care. I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.